Children abandon elderly parents on roadside with only a birdcage. Dorothy Wilson felt her legs tremble as she watched her children's car disappear around the bend in the road. Beside her, her husband Walter clutched tightly to the old cage, where two cockatiels fluttered about in fear. The dust kicked up by the car still hung in the warm air of that March afternoon, and the silence that remained was heavier than any words. The previous night had been the worst of their lives. Their three children sat around the living room table and said they had a decision to announce. Dorothy had thought it might be about their upcoming 50th wedding anniversary next month, but it wasn't. "Dad, Mum, we've talked and we just can't anymore," Richard, the oldest, had said, unable to look them in the eye. "Can't what, son?" Walter asked, still not understanding. "The situation became unsustainable after you lost everything in that business deal. We have our own families to support." Dorothy had felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Lost everything. The words echoed as if coming from very far away. Walter had invested the savings of a lifetime in a partnership that seemed promising. The partner disappeared, took the money, and they were left with nothing. The house had been in the children's names ever since Walter had health problems years ago, a precaution that now turned against them. "What exactly are you saying?" Dorothy had asked, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "We're going to have to ask you to leave the house," said Jennifer, the middle child, looking at her phone instead of at her parents. "Leave?" Walter repeated, as if he didn't understand English. "But where will we go?" "You'll have to figure it out. We've already done a lot," added Daniel, the youngest, with a coldness Dorothy had never seen in her son. The rest of the night had been a blur of tears, ignored pleas, and suitcases packed in haste. The children were clear. They could take only the essentials. When Dorothy picked up the cage with the cockatiels, Jennifer had complained. "Mom, really? You're taking those animals?" "They're Timmy's," Dorothy replied, clutching the cage to her chest. "They're all I have left of him." Timmy was the oldest grandson, Richard's son, who had left this world too soon. A sweet boy who loved his grandparents and had raised those birds with such affection. The cage was special, all crafted from dark wood with delicate details. Timmy's grandfather on his father's side had been a talented craftsman, and this had been one of the last pieces he made before he passed away too. No one objected further. Perhaps because everyone there carried the guilt of Timmy in their hearts, each in their own way. And now they were there, stranded in the middle of nowhere, near a gas station on the highway, connecting the town where they lived to other small towns in the Kentucky countryside. Walter had graying hair and a beard that needed trimming, his face marked by years and sun. Dorothy wore a dark shawl that covered part of her white hair, and her wrinkled hands trembled as she held the cage handle together with her husband. "What do we do now, Walter?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. "I don't know, Dottie," he replied, using the affectionate nickname from so many years. "I don't know." One of the cockatiels let out a soft chirp, as if also confused by the situation. Dorothy looked at the birds, Honey and Sugar as Timmy had named them. They had those characteristic yellow crests and seemed as lost as she felt. The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky in orange hues. The dusty road stretched in both directions, with no houses in sight, just the gas station a few yards behind them, and brushland fading into the distance. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Let's go to the gas station," Walter decided, picking up the small suitcase they had managed to bring. "Maybe we can use the phone, call someone." "Call who?" Dorothy asked bitterly. "Our children just abandoned us. Who else do we have?" The question hung in the air unanswered. They walked slowly to the station. Walter limped slightly on his right leg, a lingering effect from a work accident years ago. Dorothy carried the cage carefully, shielding the birds from the wind that was starting to blow stronger. The station was small, one of those roadside stops that serve more truckers than passenger cars. It had a small attached shop, and a middle-aged man at the register who watched them curiously as they entered. "Good afternoon," Walter greeted, trying to maintain his dignity despite everything. "Would you happen to have a phone we could use?" The man pointed to a payphone outside. There's one there, but it only works with a phone card. We don't have a card, Dorothy said softly. The man observed them more closely, saw the old suitcase, the cage, the defeated look on both their faces. Something in his expression changed. Let me guess. You folks need some help. Walter was about to respond with some excuse, to preserve what pride they had left, but Dorothy was quicker. Our children left us here, she said, and her voice trembled. We have nowhere to go. The man made a face as if he'd felt a twinge of pain. What a world, huh? He murmured. Look, I can't do much, but there's a trucker who stops here every week. He's a good guy, maybe he can give you a ride to the next town over. He should be here soon. We appreciate any help, Walter replied. They sat on a wooden bench outside the station, the cage between them. The silence grew heavy again, but it was different now. There was a sense of unreality, as if this couldn't really be happening. Dorothy looked at her husband. Walter had been a hard-working man all his life. He started as a bricklayer's helper as a teenager and worked his way up until he could open his own small construction company. Nothing too big, but enough to provide a decent life for the family. He had built the house they lived in for 30 years, with his own hands, brick by brick. And now that house was no longer theirs. The children had taken everything. Do you think they'll regret it? Dorothy asked suddenly. Walter took his time answering. I think they already do, Dottie. But regret doesn't change what's been done. How did we raise children capable of doing this? We did the best we could. The rest was their choice. A large truck began to appear on the road, slowing down as it approached the station. It was one of those cargo trucks, painted a faded red, with the distinctive rumble of a diesel engine. The driver got out, a sturdy man around 40, wearing a cap and a flannel shirt. He greeted the man at the station, who promptly pointed toward Dorothy and Walter. The two talked for a few minutes, the driver glancing in the couple's direction a few times. Then he approached. Good afternoon. My name is Frank, he said with a kind smile. Charlie over there told me you need a ride. I'm heading to Millbrook, about 50 miles from here. I can take you if you'd like. We don't want to be a bother, and Walter began, but Frank shook his head. No bother at all. I've been driving alone for hours. Company is always welcome. And look, I know what it's like to go through hard times. If I can help, I will. Dorothy felt her eyes well up again, but this time it was a different kind of tear. It was gratitude for finding kindness amidst so much pain. We accept. Thank you very much, she said. You can get in then. I'll just refuel and we'll be on our way. 15 minutes later, they were in the truck's cab. Walter in the front with Frank, Dorothy Wilson in the back with the cage and the suitcase. The cockatiels had calmed down a bit, despite the vehicle's swaying. During the first few miles, no one spoke much. Frank played some soft country music on the radio, and the engine's rumble filled the silence. But after a while, he started making conversation. So, if it's not too personal, what happened to you? Walter and Dorothy exchanged a look. It was humiliating to have to tell, but the man had been too kind to deserve lies. Our children kicked us out of the house, Walter said, his voice heavy. I lost money in a bad business deal, and they decided they couldn't take care of us anymore. Frank let out a low whistle. Man, what a situation. Sorry to ask, but don't you have other relatives? Friends? Most of our friends have passed away or are in a similar situation to ours, Dorothy replied. And family. I don't have anyone else besides my children. Walter has a distant cousin, but we lost touch years ago. And these little birds? Frank asked, looking in the rearview mirror. Dorothy gently stroked the cage. They were our grandsons. He passed away 3 years ago. He was only 17. The cage was the most precious thing to him. My husband always says it has sentimental value, but to me, it's more than that. It's all I have left of Timmy. I'm so sorry, Frank said sincerely. Losing a young grandson like that, there's no greater pain. The silence returned for a few minutes, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was the silence of those who understand that some pains don't need words. You know, Frank started again after a while, my mother went through something similar. Not the same, but similar. My older brother wanted her to sell her house to give him money to invest. When she refused, he just stopped talking to her. It's been 5 years since he's seen his own mother. And you? Dorothy asked. I take care of her. She lives with me and my wife. It's not always easy, especially when I'm on the road for days like this, but we manage. She's my mother, right? She took care of me my whole life. It's the least I can do. Walter felt a tightness in his chest. That was what he had expected from his own children. Not wealth, not luxury. Just that they wouldn't abandon him when he needed them most. You're good people, he said to Frank. Your mother is lucky. I'm the lucky one to still have her, Frank replied. You know, I keep thinking we're getting older too one day. How do we want to be treated when we get there? It was a simple but profound question. Dorothy looked out the truck window, watching the landscape go by. Fields, fences, a few scattered houses. The Kentucky countryside had a peaceful beauty, but she couldn't appreciate anything at that moment. Frank, can I ask you something? Walter said after a while. Sure. Do you think I failed as a father, for my children to do this to me? Frank thought before answering. Look, I don't know your whole story. But what I do know is that we can only control our own actions, not others. Your children are adults. They made a decision. That says more about them than about you. But I should have done something differently somewhere, Walter insisted. I should have taught them better, shown them different values. Or maybe you taught them everything right and they chose not to follow it, Dorothy interjected, touching her husband's shoulder. Walter, you were a wonderful father. You worked day and night to give them everything. The problem isn't you. She's right, Frank agreed. Sometimes we do everything right, and things still go wrong. It's not your fault. Walter didn't answer, but Dorothy saw him press his lips together, fighting back his emotions. She had known this man for over 50 years. She knew every expression, every gesture, and she knew he was blaming himself, searching for the mistake he had made. But had it been a mistake? Or just life showing that even dedicated parents can raise ungrateful children? The truck continued down the road as the sun kept descending on the horizon. Honey and Sugar chirped softly, a gentle sound that somehow brought a small comfort. Those birds had been cared for with so much love by Timmy. He would spend hours talking to them, teaching them little tricks, cleaning their cage with care. Dorothy remembered the day Timmy got the cockatiels. He was 14 and had asked for them as a birthday gift. Walter built the special cage with the help of a friend who was a craftsman, and it was one of the most beautiful pieces they had ever made together. The wood was dark and noble, with small carvings on the sides that formed delicate patterns of leaves and flowers. "Grandma, look how beautiful they are," Timmy had shouted, his eyes shining. "I'm going to take care of them forever." But Timmy's forever had been interrupted too soon. One day he was fine, the next he was in the hospital with a very high fever. The doctors talked about infection, complications, technical words Dorothy didn't understand. Within a week, he was gone. Richard, the boy's father, changed after that. He became more withdrawn, more distant. Jennifer and Daniel also drifted away, each dealing with the loss in their own way. And Dorothy and Walter were left with the responsibility of caring for the cockatiels, keeping their grandson's memory alive through those little beings. "We're almost there," Frank announced, pulling Dorothy from her thoughts. "Millbrook, do you know where you want to go?" Walter and Dorothy exchanged looks. No, they didn't know. "Is there a boarding house or some cheap place to stay?" Walter asked. "We have a little money left, but not much. There's Mrs. Martha's boarding house. It's simple but clean and cheap. She's a good person. She'll treat you well." "You can drop us off there then," Dorothy requested. The town was small, typical of the Kentucky countryside. Narrow streets, simple houses, a church in the center, a few shops. Frank drove to an old but well-kept house, painted light yellow, with a discreet sign in front. "Martha's boarding house." "This is it," he said, stopping the truck. They got out, Walter helping Dorothy with the cage. Frank also got out and grabbed their suitcase. "Look, I can't give much, but..." He took some bills from his pocket. "Take this. It'll help with the first few days." "No, we can't accept," Walter refused. "You've already done too much. Please, I wouldn't be able to sleep soundly knowing I didn't help. Accept it." Dorothy took the money, her eyes welling up again. "May God bless you and your family, Frank." "Amen," he replied with a smile. "Take care. And look, if you need anything, my number is on this paper here. I pass through this area every week." He handed over a piece of paper with a scribbled number and said goodbye. They stood on the sidewalk watching the red truck drive away until it disappeared around the street corner. "There are still good people in the world," Dorothy murmured. "There are," Walter agreed. "Let's go in." The boarding house door was open. They entered a small hall with a wooden counter. Behind it was a woman about 60 years old, her hair in a bun, glasses on her nose, reading something in a notebook. "Good afternoon," she greeted, looking up. "Can I help you?" "Good afternoon." "We're looking for a room to rent," Walter said, "for a few days until we get organized." The woman quickly assessed them, her gaze stopping on the cage Dorothy was holding. "You have birds," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "We do. They're cockatiels. If it's a problem—" "No problem," she interrupted, but there was something odd in her tone. "You can come in. I have a room available, 200 reais a week, breakfast included." "We'll take it," Walter agreed. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, led them down a narrow hallway to a small but clean room at the back of the boarding house. It had a double bed, an old wardrobe, a small table and a chair. The window looked out onto a small yard with a few trees. "The bathroom is shared just down the hall," she explained. "Breakfast is at 7. If you need anything, just call." "Thank you very much," Dorothy said. Martha was about to leave but stopped at the door, looking once more at the cage. "May I see the birds?" Dorothy found the request strange but had no reason to refuse. She placed the cage on the table, and Martha approached, carefully observing not the cockatiels, but the cage itself. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice different now, almost reverent. "The cage. It was made a few years ago by a craftsman friend of my husband," Dorothy explained. "Why?" Martha gently touched the bars, then the carved sides. "I recognize this work," she said softly. "My husband was a collector of antique pieces. He passed away 3 years ago, but before that, he spent decades studying Brazilian craftsmanship. This cage, it was made by a master. Look at these carvings, the proportions, the type of wood. This is genuine jacaranda, and the work is by someone who knew what they were doing." "Old Clarence was very talented indeed," Walter commented. "He's passed on too." "Clarence? Clarence who?" "Clarence Thompson. He lived in Lexington, had a small workshop where he made furniture and special pieces." Martha turned pale. "Clarence Thompson?" she repeated. "Are you saying this cage was made by Clarence Thompson?" "Yes. Why?" Dorothy asked, confused by the reaction. Martha sat in the chair as if her legs had given way. "Clarence Thompson is a well-known name among collectors. He wasn't just a craftsman, he was an artist. His pieces are extremely rare because he made few, and each one was unique. My husband searched for years for one of his pieces and never found one." "You're saying this cage has value?" Walter asked, feeling something strange in his chest. "It does. A lot of value. I'd need to do more research, confirm its authenticity, but if it's truly a piece by Clarence Thompson, you might be holding something worth tens of thousands of reais. Maybe more." Dorothy sat on the bed, shock evident on her face. Walter stood still, processing the information. "But that can't be right," Dorothy murmured. "Clarence was a simple man, an ordinary craftsman." "The greatest artists are often simple," Martha said. "They don't do their work for fame or money. They do it because they love it. But that doesn't diminish the value of what they create. May I look into this further?" "You may," Walter agreed, still dazed. "But even if it's worth all that, we're not selling. This cage belonged to our grandson. It's too special." Martha nodded in understanding. "I respect that, but you should at least know what you have. Let me do some research tonight, and we can talk more tomorrow." She left, leaving Dorothy and Walter alone with the revelation. They looked at the cage as if seeing it for the first time. "Walter, did you know about this?" Dorothy asked. "No. I knew Clarence was good, but I never imagined his pieces were worth so much. What do we do?" "For now, nothing. We rest, we think. It's been a very long day." They got ready for bed. Walter lay down first, exhaustion evident in his body. Dorothy stayed awake a little longer, looking out the window at the dark yard. The cockatiels had fallen asleep, small yellow and grey shapes quiet in the cage. She thought of their children. Did they ever imagine their parents might have something of value? No, probably not. They just wanted to get rid of a burden, and now, ironically, that burden could be their salvation. But Dorothy couldn't feel happy about it. She only felt a deep emptiness, a pain that no money could heal, because in the end, what mattered more? A valuable cage or children who loved you? She lay down beside her husband, who was already softly snoring. She closed her eyes, but sleep was slow to come, and when it did, it brought confusing dreams of Timmy smiling, of birds flying free, and of her children turning their backs and walking away. The next morning, Dorothy woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. Walter was still asleep. She got up slowly, put on a robe she had brought in her suitcase, and opened the door. Martha was talking with an older man in the hallway. Seeing Dorothy, she smiled. "Good morning. I hope we didn't wake you." "No, I was already waking up. Is the coffee ready?" "Yes, it is. By the way, this is Mr. Howard, one of the boarding house guests. Howard, this is Dorothy." The man extended his hand. He was tall, thin, probably around 70 years old, with completely white hair and shrewd eyes behind thin-framed glasses. "Pleasure to meet you." "Likewise." "Howard is a retired lawyer," Martha explained. "He's been living here at the boarding house for 6 months. Tell her what you told me, Howard." The man seemed a bit embarrassed. "Well, Martha told me about your situation last night. I couldn't help but overhear when she was on the phone researching the cage. And, look, I know it's none of my business, but if you need any legal help, some guidance, I can help. No charge." Dorothy felt a mix of gratitude and discomfort. On one hand, it was kind of him. On the other, it was humiliating to need charity. "I don't know if we need a lawyer," she said. "We just need to get organized, find a way to move forward." "I understand. But sometimes things are more complicated than they seem. Martha told me your children kicked you out of the house. Was the house in their name?" "It was. My husband put it in their name a few years ago when he had some health problems, and we were afraid that if something happened, the house would be lost." "And they just asked you to leave?" "Yes. They said they couldn't take care of us anymore." Howard shook his head. "That could constitute elder abandonment. It's a crime under the elderly statute. Besides, if the house was transferred but you continued living there, there might be a right of occupancy. But I would need to see documents, understand the situation better." "We don't want to sue our children," Dorothy said quickly. "I understand. But maybe you'd want to have your options clear. Know what you can or can't do. Think about it calmly." Walter appeared at the bedroom door at that moment, still looking sleepy. "Good morning, what's going on?" Dorothy quickly explained about Howard and his offer of help. Walter listened silently, then extended his hand to the lawyer. "That's very kind of you. We accept talking, at least. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing." They had breakfast together in the boarding house's small dining room. There were 2 other guests, a young man working temporarily in town and a middle-aged woman visiting family. The conversation was light, but Dorothy could barely concentrate. After breakfast, Martha asked them to come to a small office she kept in the boarding house. It was a tiny room with a desk full of papers, an old computer, and shelves with books. "I spent the night researching," she began, opening a folder on the computer. "And I confirmed it. Clarence Thompson is indeed an important name in the world of Brazilian craftsmanship. There are collectors who pay fortunes for his pieces. I saw a chair that sold for 80,000 reais 2 years ago." 80,000, Dorothy repeated, incredulous. "Yes, and your birdcage. Well, there's something that makes it even more special." Martha turned the computer screen toward them. There was a photo of an old page, seemingly from a catalogue or magazine. Clarence Thompson had a unique characteristic. In some of his most special pieces, he hid authenticity certificates inside secret compartments, usually at the bottom, in a false section. It was a way to protect his authorship and also add an element of mystery to the piece. Walter looked at the birdcage, which they had brought into the office. "Are you saying there might be a secret compartment in there?" "I am, and if there is, and if there's a certificate, the value could be multiplied several times." "How do we find out?" Dorothy asked. "Carefully," Martha replied. "The piece is delicate, but I have experience with this. I used to help my husband with his collection. If you allow me, I can examine it." Walter and Dorothy exchanged glances. It was frightening to think that this object they carried with such affection could be worth so much. But it was also a possibility for change. "You can examine it," Walter authorized. Martha worked carefully, first taking the cockatiels out of the cage and placing them temporarily in a lined box. Then she began to examine every inch of the cage, tapping lightly, listening for any hollow sound. Howard entered the office at that moment and observed in silence. The tension in the room was palpable. After almost half an hour, Martha smiled. "Found it," she said, pointing to a part of the bottom. "See this? This piece here is slightly different from the rest. I'll try to open it." She used a small tool, working with the patience of someone familiar with antique pieces. There was a soft click, and a small board slid to the side, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, there was an envelope yellowed with time. Martha carefully removed it and opened it. Inside were two papers. One was clearly a certificate, with a detailed description of the piece, date, signature of Clarence Thompson, and even a small photograph of the cage. The other paper appeared to be a letter. "This is incredible," Martha murmured, reading the certificate. "This piece was made in 1998, and the certificate confirms all the details. With this, the value could easily reach $100,000 or more in the collector's market." Dorothy felt her legs tremble. Walter gripped the edge of the table. "And this letter?" he asked. Martha picked up the letter and began to read aloud. "To whoever finds this message, if you're reading this, it means that somehow this cage has come into your hands. It was made with special affection for my great-grandson, Timmy, a boy with a pure heart who loves birds and dreams of flying. In it, I put not only my work but my soul. May it protect the little beings it will house, and may it bring joy to future generations. If one day it needs to be sold, may it be only for real need, never for greed. The true value of things is not in money, but in the love they carry. With affection, Clarence Thompson, October 1998. The silence that followed was profound. Dorothy began to cry, not from sadness, but from a complex emotion mixing pain and beauty. "He made this for Timmy," she whispered. "Knowing that one day he would pass away, he left a message." "Great-grandson," Walter said, his voice choked. "Clarence was the father of Richard's mother. That makes Timmy his great-grandson." The family connection made everything even more meaningful. That wasn't just a valuable piece, it was a link between generations, a demonstration of love that transcended separation. Howard, who had observed everything in silence, cleared his throat. "You have an important decision to make. This cage could solve your financial problems. But I also understand if you want to keep it." "We're not going to sell it," Dorothy said immediately. "Not after reading this." "Dottie," Walter began, "we need to think calmly. We're without a home, without many things. This money could give us security." "I don't care. Clarence made it clear. Only sell if it's a real need, not out of greed. We'll find another way." "But it is a real need," Walter argued. "We need a place to live, money for food." The discussion was starting to heat up when Martha intervened. "May I suggest something? You don't need to sell the cage to benefit from it. There are other options. For example, a museum or collector could pay for the right to display it, while it would still belong to you. Or you could arrange a lifetime payment agreement in exchange for keeping it on display." "How so?" Dorothy asked. "Well, there are museums and cultural spaces that value pieces like this. They would pay a monthly amount to have the cage on exhibit, but it would remain your property. It's a way to preserve the memory of the craftsman and his grandson, and at the same time have an income." It was an idea that hadn't occurred to any of them. Walter and Dorothy exchanged glances, pondering. "How much would that monthly amount be?" Walter asked. "It would depend on the negotiation, but based on the value of the piece, I'd say you could get between 3,000 to 5,000 reais per month. It's not a fortune, but it's a decent amount. 3 to 5,000 reais. It was less than they earned when Walter had the construction company, but it was enough to live with dignity. And it would mean not losing the cage, not betraying Clarence's message. Let's think about it, Walter decided. But it seems like a good option to me. Martha nodded. Of course. And I can help make the necessary contacts when you decide. Howard, who had been quiet, spoke. Since we're talking about finances, you mentioned that Walter lost money in a business deal. Can you tell me more about that? Walter sighed. I had a small construction company. It wasn't much, but it provided for us. A man showed up with a proposal, form a partnership to bid on bigger projects. I put in all the money I had, and he disappeared. I never saw the money or the man again. Did you file a police report? No, I was ashamed, thought people would think I was a fool. And the partnership documents? Did you have any contract? Yes. It's all in a folder that was left in the house. The boys must have thrown it out. Howard made a face. That could have been useful. But still, there are legal deadlines. Depending on when this happened, maybe something can be done. It's been 8 months. Then there's still time, but without the documents, it's difficult. I might be able to get it, Walter said slowly. Or at least try. I know where the folder was kept. That would be good. And about the house, do you have the transfer documents? I have copies. I brought them in the suitcase thinking I might need them. Great. Can I take a look? Walter went to get the papers. Meanwhile, Dorothy put the cockatiels back in the cage, now knowing that this simple object carried not only memories but also history and value. Howard examined the documents carefully. His expression changed several times, going from neutral to serious, then to something that seemed like hope. Look, he said finally. The house transfer was done legally, that's true, but there's a clause here that could be very useful for you. What clause? Dorothy asked. It says that the transfer would only be valid after the death of both original owners. As long as you are alive, you have the right to live there for life. Your children couldn't legally evict you. Are you sure? Walter asked, feeling something like hope for the first time in days. Absolutely. This type of clause is common when making a living donation. It's protection for the donors. You can return to the house and demand that your children take you back. I don't know if we want to go back, Dorothy said quietly. After what they did, I understand, but it's important that you know you have this right. And besides, this violation could have other legal implications. How so? Elder abandonment is a crime, and if you want, you can report your children. I'm not saying you should do it, but it's an option. Walter wiped his face, exhausted. We don't want our children to be arrested or anything like that. It wouldn't necessarily be jail time, but there could be protective measures, fines, mandatory assistance. It's a way to ensure you won't be abandoned again. It was a lot to process. Dorothy felt a headache starting behind her eyes. Everything had changed so fast. Yesterday they were being abandoned on the road, and today they discovered they had a valuable object and legal rights they didn't even know existed. We'll need time to think about all this, she said. Of course, Howard agreed. There's no rush. Stay here at the boarding house, gather your thoughts. When you're ready to decide, I'll help with whatever's needed. Martha also offered, and about the cage, I'll start making discreet contacts with museums and cultural spaces. I won't commit you to anything, just explore options. Is that okay? Okay, Walter agreed. The rest of the day passed in a haze. They had lunch at the boarding house, a simple but tasty meal. Afterwards, they went for a walk through town, needing fresh air and time to talk. Millbrook was small but charming. It had a central square with an old church, some family-owned shops, a small market. People greeted each other on the streets, and there was a sense of community that Dorothy had forgotten existed. You know, Walter said as they walked, it's been years since we had time to just walk like this. It's true, always in a hurry, always working. And in the end, for what? For our children to throw us out like trash? Walter, don't talk like that. But it's true, Dottie. We gave them everything, and they abandoned us. I know, but dwelling on it won't help. They sat on a bench in the square. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing in the afternoon air. Dorothy watched the families, fathers and mothers caring for their children, grandparents playing with grandchildren. "Do you think Richard thinks about Timmy?" she asked suddenly. "Of course he does. How could he not? Then how can he do to us what he did? We were the grandparents of his son, whom he loved so much." Walter had no answer. It was a painful contradiction, a knot he couldn't untie. An elderly man approached the bench, walking with difficulty with the help of a cane. He smiled at them. "Nice afternoon, isn't it?" "It is," Walter replied politely. "Are you new in town?" "I don't recognize the faces." "We are. We arrived yesterday." "Welcome then. Millbrook is small, but we look out for each other here. If you need anything, just ask." And he went on his slow way, leaving Dorothy and Walter with a strange feeling. That stranger had been kinder to them in 30 seconds than their own children had been. "Do you think we should call them?" Dorothy asked. "Just to say we're okay?" If they cared, they would have called already. But even as he said it, Walter felt a tightness in his chest. They were his children. No matter how much they had hurt him, he still loved them. Was it possible to love and be hurt at the same time? Apparently, yes. They returned to the boarding house as the sun began to set. They had dinner with the other guests, a shared meal where conversation flowed easily. The young man talked about the temporary work. The middle-aged woman spoke about the family she was visiting. And Dorothy realized something. In that simple boarding house, with those people she barely knew, she felt more welcomed than she had in a long time in her own home with her own children. At night, lying in bed next to Walter, she heard the soft sounds of the sleeping cockatiels, honey and sugar, the last living memories of Timmy. "Walter," she called out in the dark. "Hmm? Do you think we did the right thing by not selling the cage?" "I do. Money is important, but it's not everything. We need to remember that." "And about the boys? What do we do?" Walter took his time to answer. "I don't know, Dottie. My heart says one thing. My head says another." "What does your heart say?" "That I want my children back. That I want to understand what went wrong, to fix it. But my head says maybe it can't be fixed. That maybe we need to move on without them." "It's so hard," Dorothy whispered. "It is. But we'll find a way. We always do." And holding each other there in that simple bed of a boarding house in a town they barely knew, they fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional weight of the last few days. The next morning, Martha sought them out right after breakfast. "I have news," she said, looking excited. "I made some contacts last night, and a folk art museum in Nashville showed a lot of interest in the cage. They want to send a specialist here to evaluate it in person." "So quickly?" Walter was surprised. "Clarence Thompson's pieces are rare. When one appears, it causes immediate interest. The specialist could come tomorrow if you agree." "We agree," Dorothy decided. And so another day passed in a strange mix of waiting and activity. Howard helped them organize the documents they had, making copies and sorting everything into folders. Martha continued her research on Clarence Thompson, discovering more about the artisan's life and work. In the middle of the afternoon, the boarding house phone rang. Martha answered and then came looking for Dorothy and Walter. "It's for you," she said, with a worried expression. "It's someone calling about you." Dorothy picked up the phone with trembling hands. "Hello?" "Mrs. Dorothy." It was a woman's voice she didn't recognize. "My name is Barbara. I'm your neighbor in Lexington. I saw your children on the street today and asked about you. They said you had gone to visit relatives, but I'm sorry, I didn't believe it. I know it's none of my business, but are you all right?" Dorothy felt her eyes sting. That woman, who was just a distant acquaintance, cared more than her own children. "We're fine, Barbara. Thank you for your concern." "Where are you? Can I help with anything?" "We're in Millbrook, staying at a boarding house, but everything's under control." "Millbrook? But why so far away?" There was genuine confusion in Barbara's voice. Dorothy didn't know what to say, how to explain that their own children had abandoned them. "It's a long story," she said finally. "Your children did something wrong, didn't they?" Barbara wasn't foolish. "I always thought there was something odd about that family. Forgive me for saying this, but they never seemed very attentive to you. Barbara, I appreciate the concern, but do you need anything? I can send money, food, whatever." The kindness was too much. Dorothy started to cry. "No need. We're fine. But thank you from the bottom of my heart." Look, I'll spread the word that you're okay, all right? But if you need anything, anything at all, call me. And Mrs. Dorothy, don't let your children get away with it if they did something bad. Old folks deserve respect." After hanging up, Dorothy told Walter about the conversation. He shook his head, between laughter and tears. The world's upside down. Neighbors care more than children. But Christina's call had another effect. She spread to other neighbors that Dorothy and Walter were fine but out of town, and this reached their children's ears. That same evening, the boarding house phone rang again. This time it was Richard. "Dad?" His voice sounded tense. Walter felt his heart race. "Richard, where are you? The neighbor said you're in Millbrook. What are you doing there?" "We're managing just like you told us to." "Dad, it's not like that. We just needed you to give us some time to get organized." "Get organized?" "You put us out on the street, Richard. We didn't put you out on the street, we just needed space. And we needed children who cared." There was silence on the other end. "Dad, look." "No, you look, Richard. You and your siblings made a choice. Now we're making ours. We'll manage without you. But you can't just disappear like that. We're your family." "Family?" Walter laughed bitterly. "Family doesn't abandon." "Dad, don't exaggerate. We just asked you to leave the house. Leaving us by the roadside with no destination. That's not asking, Richard. That's throwing away. We thought you'd go to our cousin, Aunt Connie." "Connie? We haven't spoken to her in 15 years. And how were we supposed to find her if you didn't even let us take enough money?" "We left money. 50 rays, Richard. 50 rays for 2 elderly people to manage." Silence returned. Walter could hear his son's heavy breathing over the phone. "Dad, we made a mistake, okay? But the situation is tough for everyone. And is it easy for us? Do you think it's easy for a 72-year-old man to start over from scratch? You're not alone. Mom is with you. And that's all we have, each other. Because you 3 made it very clear we can't count on you." "Dad, don't call me again, Richard. Not until you understand what you've done." And Walter hung up, his hands trembling. Dorothy hugged him, and they stayed like that for a long time, holding each other as the world seemed to crumble and rebuild itself at the same time. The next day, the museum expert arrived. He was a cultured middle-aged man who introduced himself as Lawrence Bennett. He examined the birdcage with a reverence that bordered on religious. "It's authentic," he confirmed after nearly an hour of analysis, "without a doubt. And with the certificate and the letter from Clarence Thompson himself, this becomes a piece of historical importance." "And what about what Martha suggested?" Walter asked. "About the museum paying to display the piece?" "It's entirely feasible. In fact, I'd like to propose something beyond that. The museum is planning a special exhibition on forgotten Brazilian artisans. Clarence Thompson would be the centerpiece. The birdcage would be featured, with the whole story behind it. And in return, we offer a lifetime monthly payment of 4,000 reais, adjusted annually for inflation." 4,000 reais every month, Dorothy repeated. "Yes, and you would retain ownership of the piece. It would be a kind of partnership. The museum benefits from having a unique piece. You benefit financially. And the memory of Clarence Thompson and his grandson would be preserved and honored." Walter and Dorothy exchanged glances. 4,000 reais a month was more than they had hoped for. It was enough to live with dignity, maybe even save a little. "We accept," Walter decided, "but with one condition." "What is it?" "We want the whole story told, not just about Clarence Thompson and his work, but about Timmy, our grandson, about how he loved those birds, about the birdcage being made especially for him. We want people to know that art isn't just technique, it's love." Lawrence smiled. "That makes the exhibition even more special, the human story behind the art. We'll do exactly that." The contracts were prepared with Howard's help, who reviewed every line to ensure Dorothy and Walter were protected. The signing took place 3 days later, and the first payment was made immediately. 4,000 reais in the account. It wasn't the money from Walter's lost investment, it wasn't the security of having their own home, but it was a fresh start. With part of the money, they bought new clothes, things they needed, medicine that had run out. They paid for 2 more weeks at the boarding house. And they began looking for a more permanent place to live. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. It was Martha who suggested, "You know, there's a little house for rent nearby. It belongs to an acquaintance of mine. It's small but well kept, and with $4,000 a month, you can pay the rent and still have some left over." They went to see the house that same day. It was indeed small, with 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen and bathroom. But it had a little backyard where the cockatiels could stay during the day. It had large windows that let in the sun, and it had something the house in Lexington no longer had, the feeling of being a home. "We'll take it," Dorothy decided. "Are you sure?" Walter asked. "It's much smaller than the other house." "It doesn't matter. Here no one can kick us out. This is ours." And so, 2 weeks after being abandoned on the roadside, Dorothy and Walter moved into their new home in Millbrook. They had almost nothing, just the clothes that fit in the old suitcase, the cage with the cockatiels, and a surprising determination to start over. Martha and Howard helped them move, donating some things they no longer used: a table, chairs, pots, bedding. The small community also contributed. The grocery store owner donated groceries. The neighbor gave an old but comfortable sofa. A family from the local church showed up with a wardrobe. "We can't accept all this," Dorothy protested, but people insisted. "Here in Millbrook we take care of our own," an elderly lady said, and the others nodded in agreement. It was different from the big city where they had lived. There, people still cared. There was still a sense of community. But while they tried to settle in, the situation with their children remained complicated. Richard called more often, but Walter refused to answer. Jennifer sent messages saying they needed to talk. Daniel showed up in town one day looking for his parents. It was Howard who found him first. "You must be one of the children," he said, not as a question. "Who are you?" Daniel asked defensively. "A friend of your parents, and before you ask, they don't want to see you." "They can't just disappear. We're family." "Family? It's interesting you use that word. Explain how abandoning elderly parents by the roadside fits the definition of family." "We didn't abandon them, we just needed space." "So I see. Space, that's a nice word for selfishness." Daniel turned red. "You don't know anything about our situation." "I know enough. I know that you 3 decided it was too much work to take care of your parents. I know you put them in a car, took them to the middle of nowhere, and left them there with practically nothing. I know you're now trying to justify that cruelty with weak excuses. Listen here, old man. No, you listen here, boy. Your parents don't want anything to do with you right now. They're trying to rebuild their lives, and you're not part of that rebuilding. If you really care, leave them alone. When they're ready, if they ever are, they'll reach out to you." Daniel seemed about to argue, but something in Howard's expression made him reconsider. He muttered something under his breath and left. When Howard told Dorothy and Walter about the encounter, both their reactions were complex. "He came all the way here," Dorothy murmured. "That means something, doesn't it?" "It means he wants to ease his conscience," Walter replied bitterly. "Not that he actually cares." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. If he really cared, he wouldn't have left us on the roadside in the first place." "But he's your son, Walter. Our son. And we were his parents. But that didn't mean anything when he decided to abandon us." The wound was too deep to heal quickly. Dorothy understood that. But part of her, the part that was a mother, wanted to believe redemption was possible. The weeks went by. Dorothy and Walter adjusted to their new life. They woke up early, had coffee while looking at the backyard where the cockatiels sang in the cage. They shopped at the local market, where the owner always gave them an extra discount. They took part in community events, church services, simple gatherings, and slowly, without really noticing how, they began to feel at home. Lawrence, the museum expert, visited them a few times to talk about the exhibition. He wanted details about Timmy, about Clarence Thompson, about the family. He wanted to understand not just the piece of art, but the people behind it. "Did you know Clarence Thompson was a fascinating man?" he shared during one of these visits. "He never wanted fame or recognition. He made his pieces because he loved the work. He said every piece of wood had a story to tell, and he was just helping to reveal it." "That's just how he was," Walter agreed. "Humble, dedicated. He spent hours in the workshop working quietly. When he made this cage for Timmy, it took him 3 months. He said he wanted it to be perfect. And it is. The technique is flawless. But what makes it special is exactly what you just said, the love with which it was made. The exhibition was scheduled for 3 months later. Lawrence promised it would be a beautiful, respectful event that would honor the memory of both Clarence and Timmy. But in the meantime, another complication arose. Jennifer, the middle daughter, showed up in town with a lawyer. She wanted to contest her parents' right to the cage, claiming it was family property and belonged to all of Clarence Thompson's descendants. Howard defended them, presenting all the necessary documents. The cage had been a gift from Clarence to Timmy, and after the boy's passing, his personal belongings went to the grandparents who raised him. There was no legal basis for Jennifer's challenge, but the attempt revealed something painful. She wasn't interested in the cage for sentimental value. She was interested in the money. "What do you mean you're contesting the cage?" Walter asked when he finally agreed to speak with his daughter in Howard's presence. "Dad, that thing is worth a fortune. We have a right to a share of it." "A right? You abandoned us. You left us with nothing. And now you want a share of what we've managed to have?" "It's not like that. The cage belonged to Timmy. He was my nephew. It's only fair that the whole family gets a part." "You didn't care about Timmy when he was alive," Dorothy said, her voice icy. "You didn't come to his little parties, you didn't call on his birthday, and now when there's money involved, suddenly you remember he existed. That's not fair, Mom." "You know what's not fair?" Walter raised his voice. "What's not fair is what you did to us. You took our home, you threw us out, and now you want to take the only thing that supports us. That's what's not fair. You don't understand. I'm in deep debt. I need that money." "And we needed you," Dorothy replied. "But that didn't matter, did it?" Jennifer had no answer. She left with her lawyer, and Howard assured them her challenge wouldn't amount to anything. But the bitter taste remained. "How did we raise children like this?" Dorothy asked after they were alone. "I don't know anymore, Dottie. I don't know anymore." But amid so much family pain, there was light. The community of Millbrook welcomed them in a way Dorothy and Walter hadn't expected. They were invited to lunches, dinners, parties. People treated them with respect and affection. There was a particularly touching moment when a young family also staying at Mrs. Martha's boarding house went through hard times. The husband lost his job, and they were about to have to leave town. Dorothy and Walter, without saying anything, paid 2 weeks' boarding for them. It wasn't much, but it was what they could do. "Why did you do this?" the young woman asked, crying. "You barely know us." "Because we know what it's like to have nothing," Dorothy replied, "and because helping reminds us that there's still kindness in the world." The story spread through the town, and it reinforced something. Dorothy and Walter weren't just 2 elderly people who had been abandoned. They were good people who, despite everything they'd been through, still had compassion. But the cockatiels started having problems. Honey, the female, became listless, her feathers losing their shine. Sugar, the male, chirped loudly, as if distressed. "They're feeling the change," the town veterinarian explained. "Birds are sensitive to stress. The trip, the new environment, all of it affected them." "What do we do?" Dorothy asked, desperate. Losing the birds would be like losing Timmy all over again. Treatment, care, patience. And it will cost. They spent their last savings on the vet. Medications, appointments, special care. Howard tried to help financially, but they refused. "We've already received too much help," Walter said. "We'll handle this on our own." Those were difficult days. Dorothy spent hours by the cage, talking softly to the birds like Timmy used to do. Walter prepared special foods, looked up information about cockatiel care, and slowly the birds began to improve. Honey started eating with appetite again. Sugar began to sing again, cheerful sounds that filled the backyard. "They're going to be fine," the vet confirmed after another checkup. "You did a good job," Dorothy cried with relief. Those birds were more than pets. They were living memory, a connection to their beloved grandson. Meanwhile, a local journalist heard about Dorothy and Walter's story. Her name was Samantha Reed. She was young, full of energy, and saw in their story something that needed to be told. "Can I do a story about you?" she asked. I think people need to know about elder abandonment, about how it happens even in families that seem normal. Dorothy hesitated. I don't know if we want that kind of exposure. It wouldn't be negative exposure. It would be a way to raise awareness and maybe help other elderly people going through the same situation. Walter considered it. And our children, will they be mentioned? Only that there are children involved. I won't give names. I won't identify anyone. The focus would be on you, on your resilience. Then it's okay, he decided. The story was published in the local newspaper and later shared on social media. It wasn't anything big, just a well-told human interest story, but it went viral. Suddenly, people from all over the country were reading about Dorothy and Walter, about how they had been abandoned and how they were rebuilding their lives, about the valuable cage they refused to sell because it was a memory of their grandson. The comments were mostly supportive. People shared their own stories of abandoning elderly parents. Others offered help. Many simply sent words of encouragement. But it also reached their children. Richard called that night, his voice agitated. "Dad, what is this? We're being attacked on social media. People are saying we're monsters, that we abandoned you. And isn't that what you did?" Walter asked calmly. "But you don't need to shout it from the rooftops. People are saying my name where I work. I could lose my job over this." "The article didn't mention anyone by name, Richard. If people found out, it's because someone connected the dots. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you need to face the consequences of what you did." "Dad, please, ask the journalist to take the article down." "No." "Dad, you humiliated us, abandoned us, tried to take away even what puts food on our table. Now you're finding out what it's like to be judged. It's not good, is it? We made a mistake, okay? But you don't deserve this." "And did we deserve what you did?" Richard didn't answer. He hung up. Jennifer called later, practically screaming about how she was being harassed at work. Daniel sent a message saying the whole family was becoming a laughingstock. But Dorothy and Walter didn't give in. Not out of revenge, but because it wasn't fair that only they should bear the weight of the shame. Their children needed to understand the gravity of their actions. Buyers started showing up, offering higher and higher amounts for the cage. One even offered $200,000 in cash. $200,000, Walter repeated, stunned. "We could buy a house, have security for the rest of our lives." "And sell Timmy's memory?" Dorothy asked. "Betray Clarence's wish?" "No, it's a lot of money, Dottie. I know, but it doesn't change anything. The answer is still no. And it remained no for every offer that came, because there were things more important than money, and they were starting to relearn that." Lawrence returned with news about the exhibition. The museum decided to create a permanent exhibition about Clarence Thompson. Your cage would be the centerpiece, but we'll also include other works of his that we managed to locate. And there's more. We want you to participate in the opening, tell the story in person. Us? Speak in public? Dorothy got nervous. It doesn't have to be anything formal. Just share the memories. Talk about Timmy, about the meaning of the piece. People will want to hear it directly from you. It was scary, but it was also an honor, and it was a way to keep Timmy's memory alive in a way they never imagined. The weeks went by, and Dorothy and Walter settled more and more into Millbrook. They made friends, integrated into the community, joined senior groups in town. There was one group in particular, coordinated by the local church, where seniors gathered weekly to talk, do activities, simply have company. Dorothy and Walter started attending. "It's good to have people our own age to talk to," Dorothy commented after one meeting. "We understand the same things, laugh at the same jokes." It's true. And it makes me think, are there other seniors going through what we went through? Probably. Samantha said that elder abandonment is more common than we think. An idea began to form. What if they could help? What if they could use their experience to create something that would benefit others? They talked with Martha, with Howard, with the local church priest, and together they began to develop a project, a welcoming space for seniors in vulnerable situations. It wouldn't be anything grand. They didn't have the resources for a big shelter or complex structure, but maybe they could start small, offering support, guidance, a place to talk. They used part of their monthly income from the cage to rent a small room in the community center. Howard offered free legal guidance. Martha helped with the organization, and the project began. They called it the meeting place, a place where seniors could go to talk, receive guidance, find support. It wasn't perfect. It didn't solve all the problems, but it was something. The first elderly person to appear was an 80-year-old man who had been thrown out of his home by his nephews who wanted to sell the property. "I didn't know what to do," he said, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "I thought I would have to live on the street." Howard examined the documents, found irregularities in the attempted sale, and managed to ensure the man could return home. "You saved my life," he said. "We just gave you the information you needed," Dorothy replied. "The rest was you." But the man shook his head. "No, you gave me hope. And that's worth more than anything." The meeting place began to grow. More elderly people showed up, some with legal problems, others just needing company, some needing guidance on rights and benefits. The community embraced the project. Volunteers came forward to help. Donations started coming in. And Dorothy and Walter found themselves at the center of something bigger than themselves. "We turned our pain into something good," Walter said one night, lying next to Dorothy. "We did, but it still hurts, doesn't it?" "It does. It always will. But at least the pain has a purpose now." The day of the exhibition opening arrived. Lawrence arranged everything carefully. The museum in Nashville was beautiful, with Clarence Thompson's pieces displayed with reverence. But the centerpiece was the birdcage. Specially lit with honey and sugar inside, it drew everyone's attention. Beside it were photos of Timmy, of the family, texts telling the story. "It's so beautiful," Dorothy whispered, seeing it all. "It is," Walter agreed. Timmy would have loved it. When it was time for them to speak, Dorothy was nervous. There were many people there, journalists, collectors, curious onlookers. But when she started speaking, the words flowed naturally. "This birdcage was made with love," she said, "by a man who loved his work, for a boy who loved birds. And even after that boy left us too soon, the birdcage remained a symbol of love. My husband and I went through very difficult times. We were abandoned, humiliated, left with nothing. But this birdcage, it saved us. Not just for its material value, but for reminding us that there are things more important than money. There is memory, there is love, there is legacy. And we are here today to ensure that the legacy of Clarence Thompson and our grandson Timmy is never forgotten." The room was profoundly silent. Many people had tears in their eyes. Walter spoke next, telling about the friendship with Clarence, about how the craftsman worked, about his life philosophy. He used to say that every piece of wood already had its perfect shape inside. He just helped reveal it. And I think it's the same with people. No matter how much suffering we go through, our perfect shape is inside. We just need help to reveal it. Help to reveal. The exhibition was a success. Newspapers wrote about it. Visitors packed the museum in the following weeks. And the story of Dorothy, Walter, and Timmy touched many hearts. But the biggest impact was within the family. Richard showed up at the exhibition. Dorothy and Walter didn't know he was there until the end when he approached them. "Dad, Mom," he said, his voice choked. "I saw everything. I read the whole story, and I have no words to say how ashamed I feel." "Feeling ashamed is easy," Walter replied. "What's hard is doing things differently." "I know. And I want to do things differently. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I understand. I understand what we did, what we lost, the mistake we made." "And your siblings?" Dorothy asked. "Jennifer is still focused on money. But Daniel, he wants to talk. He's ashamed of what he did." "And you?" Walter wanted to know. "Do you want to talk because you truly understand or because the situation has become embarrassing?" Richard thought before answering. "At first it was because of the embarrassment, I won't lie. But after seeing all this, after understanding what you went through and how you overcame it, it's more than that now. It's genuine shame. It's pain for having caused this." "It's not enough," Walter said, "but it's a start. Can I call you? From time to time. I'm not asking to be family again like we were. I know that's not possible. I just want a chance to show I can be better." Dorothy and Walter exchanged glances. It was a difficult decision. The pain was still fresh, the wound still open. "You can call," Dorothy finally said, "but it'll be on our time, with our rules, and we'll see if your actions match your words." "I accept that. It's more than I deserve." Richard left, but he left something different in the air. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't full reconciliation, but it was a possibility, however small. "Do you think he's really changed?" Walter asked later. "I don't know. Time will tell. But at least he's trying, and that's something." Daniel showed up a few days later in Millbrook. This time Howard didn't send him away. Instead, he took him to the meeting place where Dorothy and Walter were helping a group of elderly people. "Look at what your parents do," Howard said to Daniel. "Look how they took their pain and turned it into something that helps others. That's what good people do." Daniel watched silently. He saw his mother patiently talking to a crying elderly woman. He saw his father helping an old man fill out paperwork. He saw the dedication, the care, the compassion. When Dorothy and Walter finally stopped for lunch, Daniel approached. "Hi," he said simply. "Daniel," Dorothy replied, surprised. "I came to apologize. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just need you to know that I was wrong, very wrong." "Why did you do it?" Walter asked, his voice heavy with pain. "Because I'm a coward. Because it was easier to follow Richard and Jennifer than to do what was right. Because I thought you were a burden when really I was an ungrateful son." "You were our youngest," Dorothy said, tears streaming. "We spoiled you so much, gave you everything." "I know, and I threw it all away. But I want to try to fix it. I don't know how, but I want to try." "It'll take time," Walter warned. "It's not something you fix with an apology." "I know, and I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." And unlike Richard, Daniel stayed. He stayed in Millbrook for a week, helped at the meeting place, talked with elderly people, listened to stories, and in the process he began to truly understand what his parents had gone through. On the last day before returning home, he sat with them in the backyard where the cockatiels were singing. "I'm going to do things differently," he said. "I'm going to take care of my mother, my mum, when she gets older. I'm going to take proper care of her with love, the way I should have taken care of you." "And your children?" Dorothy asked. Daniel had 2 young children. "I'm going to raise them differently. I'm going to teach them that family takes care of each other, that we don't abandon those we love. I'm going to make sure they know their real grandparents, not just through occasional visits." "We are the grandparents," Walter reminded. "I know, and I ruined that. But maybe you can be part of my children's lives again, even if you don't want to be part of mine." It was a touching offer, and Dorothy felt her heart soften a little. "We'll see," she said, "one step at a time." But it was more than she had given Richard, and Daniel understood it as the small blessing it was. Jennifer never showed up. She remained focused on her debts, her problems, on trying to get money from the cage. Her lawyer tried a few more times to contest, but Howard blocked every attempt. "She won't change," Walter said with resigned sadness. "Maybe one day," Dorothy replied, always the more optimistic of the two, but even without Jennifer, there was progress. Richard called every week, respecting the boundaries they had set. He talked about his day, asked about them, slowly rebuilding a bridge they had burned. Daniel visited once a month, always bringing his children. Dorothy and Walter's grandchildren, who barely knew their great-grandparents, began forming bonds. They played in the backyard with the cockatiels, listened to stories about the Uncle Timmy they never met. "Grandma, is Timmy the boy from the famous cage?" the oldest asked one day. "Yes," Dorothy answered. "He was very special. I wish I had met him. He would have liked to have met you too." And there, in that simple backyard of a small house in a country town, generations connected through stories, through memories, through love that survived abandonment. The meeting place continued growing. After a year, they secured a larger space, more volunteers, more resources. They formed partnerships with the City Hall, with NGOs, with other organizations. Dorothy became a sort of counselor for elderly people going through family abandonment. Walter used his construction experience to help with small repairs in the homes of needy seniors. And in that process, they discovered something surprising. The pain they carried had a purpose. Every person they helped was a way to honor their own journey. "We don't choose suffering," Dorothy said in an interview for a documentary being made about the meeting place. "But we choose what to do with it. It can let it destroy us or let it strengthen us. We chose the second option." 2 years after being abandoned on the road, Dorothy and Walter were sitting on the same park bench where they had been on their first day in Millbrook. "Remember when we sat here for the first time?" Dorothy asked. "I remember. We were lost, scared, not knowing what to do. And now? Now we have a home. We have friends. We have a purpose. We even have part of our family back, even if it's not like before." "Do you regret anything?" Walter thought. "I regret what my children did. I regret the pain. But I don't regret how we handled it all. We could have become bitter, angry. We could have given up. But we didn't." "We didn't give up," Dorothy agreed. The cockatiels, now strong and healthy, sang at home. The cage remained a display piece, bringing in stable income. The meeting place helped dozens of elderly people, and Richard and Daniel, slowly, proved through consistent actions that they were changing. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, moments of pain, painful memories. Jennifer remained distant, focused only on herself, and the wound of abandonment would never heal completely. But there was life. There was purpose. There was love. And in the end, maybe that was what mattered. On Daniel's last visit, he brought news. "Dad, Mom, I'm thinking of moving here. To Millbrook." "What?" they both said at the same time. "Seriously, I can't stand the big city anymore. And I want my kids to grow up near you, learning the values you teach. I also want to help at the meeting place. I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to contribute to something good." Dorothy and Walter exchanged glances. It was a big decision. It would mean having their son nearby, which could be wonderful or difficult. "We need to think," Walter said finally. "It's a lot to process." "I understand, and I'll wait. But know that this is what I want. Not as a way to earn forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to do." This conversation echoed in the following days. Dorothy was more in favor of the idea. Walter was more cautious. "What if he goes back to his old habits?" Walter argued. "What if he really changed?" Dorothy countered. "We can't punish forever, Walter. At some point we need to give him a chance. We've already given him several chances. And he's been responding. For 2 years now he's been doing everything right. Isn't that long enough to believe?" It was a genuine dilemma. Forgiving completely meant becoming vulnerable again, but not forgiving meant carrying the weight of resentment forever. They decided to consult Howard. "You know," he said, "forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a process. You can accept Daniel closer without necessarily trusting him completely yet. You can set boundaries, have difficult conversations, take it slow." "But how do we know if it's safe?" Dorothy asked. "It's never completely safe. There's always risk in loving, in trusting, but you also need to look at his actions. Has he been consistent? Has he shown genuine change?" "He has," Walter admitted. "For 2 years, he's been consistent." "Then maybe it's time to take the next step, but on your own time, with your boundaries." The decision was made one night, as they lay in bed listening to the sounds of the night through the open window. "We let him come," Walter said suddenly. "Are you sure?" "No, but I think we need to give him this chance. For him, for us, for the grandchildren. We can't live forever afraid of getting hurt again." "We can't," Dorothy agreed, squeezing her husband's hand. Daniel received the news with tears. He promised not to disappoint, promised to build a better relationship, and 3 months later, he moved to Millbrook with his family. The first few months were an adjustment. Daniel rented a house a few blocks from his parents, close enough to be present, but far enough to give space. He started working full-time as a volunteer at the meeting place, using his administrative skills to better organize the project. "You're good at this," Walter admitted after a few weeks. seeing how his son had organized the files and processes. "I learned a bit from you," Daniel replied. "You were always organized with the construction company." It was the first time in years they'd had a normal conversation, without the weight of abandonment hanging over every word. And it felt good. The grandchildren became constant fixtures at Dorothy and Walter's house. They played with the cockatiels, helped water the plants, listened to stories. And slowly, they built memories that would replace the gap left by absence. "Grandpa, tell us again how you found out the cage was special," the oldest would ask. And Walter would tell the story, each time adding more details, more emotion, because telling it was a way to keep it alive, to teach, to pass it on. Richard also started visiting more. He brought his wife, who had been distant but was now trying to build bridges. They didn't move to Millbrook, but they came at least once a month. "I don't expect you to forgive me completely," Richard said during one of these visits, "but I hope that one day maybe we can have some kind of relationship again." "We already do," Dorothy replied. "It's not what it was before. It never will be, but it's something, and maybe it's enough." Jennifer sent a letter one day. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't an attempt at reconciliation. It was just an update about her life, as if nothing had happened. Dorothy read it and set the letter aside. "Aren't we going to respond?" Walter asked. "Not yet. She needs to truly want forgiveness before we can give it. And if she never does, then we move forward without her. We can't force change in anyone." It was wisdom earned through pain. Some people changed, others didn't. And all they could do was control their own reactions and choices. The permanent exhibit at the museum continued to attract visitors. Lawrence organized special events, lectures, workshops about crafts. And always, at the center of it all, was Clarence Thompson's cage. "You know this has become a symbol," Lawrence said during one of those talks. "Not just of art, but of love that overcomes hardships. People come here not only to see a beautiful piece, but to hear a story of hope." "That's what Timmy would have wanted," Dorothy said, "for his story to help others." The meeting place expanded further. They secured funding to open a second location in a neighboring town. They trained more volunteers. They created a visitation program for isolated seniors. Partnerships with universities brought students who wanted to learn about elder care. "We created something bigger than ourselves," Walter said, looking at everything they had built. "We planted a seed," Dorothy corrected. "Clarence planted it when he made the birdcage. Timmy watered it when he loved the birds. We just continued the work." On the 5th anniversary of when they had been abandoned, Dorothy and Walter organized a special celebration. Not a celebration of the abandonment, but of everything they had achieved since then. 5 years, Walter said to those gathered at the meeting place. 5 years since the worst day of our lives, but also 5 years of discovery, of growth, of love rediscovered. We lost children that day, but gained a community. We lost a house, but gained a true home. We lost financial security, but gained purpose. And we learned, Dorothy continued, that family isn't just blood. Family is a choice. It's who stays, who helps, who truly loves. And all of you here are our family. There was applause, hugs, tears. Among those present were Martha and Howard, who had been essential from the start. Frank, the truck driver, who made sure to come. Daniel and his family. Richard, discreetly trying to wipe his eyes. And the cockatiels, Honey and Sugar, singing happily in their special cage. "Do you think Timmy would see this and be proud?" Dorothy asked Walter later, when they were alone. "I'm sure he would. We took his love for the birds, for the cage, and turned it into something that helps many people. It's a beautiful legacy." "Yes," Dorothy agreed. "And even with all the pain, even with everything we went through, I wouldn't trade this journey. Because it brought us here, and here is where we needed to be." The years kept passing. Dorothy and Walter grew older, as was natural, but they aged with dignity, surrounded by love and purpose. The meeting place became a regional reference, helping hundreds of seniors. Daniel proved himself truly changed, taking on more responsibilities in the project, treating his parents with consistent respect and affection. Richard kept trying, and slowly the relationship was rebuilt, different but real. Jennifer showed up one day, years later. She was older, visibly tired. "I ruined everything," she said simply. "I lost you, I lost my brothers, I lost my own family because of debts and bad choices. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry." "It took you a long time to say that," Walter replied. "I know, and I understand if you don't want to forgive me. I just needed you to know." Dorothy looked at her daughter. She saw not the greedy woman who had tried to take the cage, but a broken woman who finally recognized her mistakes. "We can't give you full forgiveness right now," she said, "but we can give you a chance. A chance for you to show through actions that you've truly changed, like your brothers did. That's all I'm asking for." And so slowly even that wound began to heal. Not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. The cage remained in the museum, but Honey and Sugar eventually passed away, as all living beings do. It was a sad day, but also one of gratitude for having lived so long and so well. "They fulfilled their purpose," Walter said, burying them in the backyard. "They kept Timmy's memory alive all these years. In his place, they put 2 ceramic cockatiel figures made by a local artisan in the displayed cage. It wasn't the same thing, but it was a way to honor his memory." Dorothy started writing, first just for herself, then encouraged by Lawrence to turn it into a book. Their story, from abandonment to rebuilding, from hardships to victories. It was published by a small publisher but touched many people. "You're a writer now," Walter joked. "I'm a storyteller," Dorothy corrected. "And our story deserved to be told." At a book launch event, an elderly woman approached. "I went through the same thing," she shared. "My children abandoned me in a nursing home and never came back. I thought my life was over. But reading your story gave me hope. It made me see there's still life possible." "There's always life possible," Dorothy replied. "As long as we breathe, as long as we have love in our hearts, there's possibility." Walter got sick a few years later. Nothing serious, but enough to scare them. During his recovery, something became clear to both. Time was precious. "We need to cherish every moment," he said from the hospital. "We already do that," Dorothy answered. "But we can do more. Travel, see places, do things we've always wanted to do." And when he recovered, they did exactly that. Not big international trips, but small adventures across the country. They visited historic towns, beaches, mountains, and in each place they brought the story of the cage, of Timmy, of rebuilding and hope. The meeting place kept growing without them needing to be there every day. Daniel took over the main management, proving to be as dedicated as his parents. Well-trained volunteers maintained the work. "We created something that will continue after us," Walter said proudly. "That's the best legacy," Dorothy agreed. On a quiet evening, sitting in their backyard, they took stock of everything. "If someone had told me," Walter began, "that afternoon when we were abandoned on the roadside, that 5, 10, 15 years later we'd be like this, happy, fulfilled, with purpose, I would never have believed it." "Me neither. At that moment it seemed like the end. But it was just a new beginning. A painful beginning. All important beginnings are." "Do you regret anything?" Dorothy thought for a long time. "I regret the pain. I regret that it had to be that way. But I don't regret where we ended up. I don't regret the people we met, the lives we touched, the love I rediscovered in the process." "Me neither," Walter agreed. "And you know what else? I think Timmy, wherever he is proud. Not just of the cage in the museum, but of everything it inspired. I'm sure he is. He was always a big-hearted boy. He'd love to see the meeting place, to see how many people are being helped. And Clarence Thompson, too. He said in that letter that true value isn't in money, but in love. We proved he was right. The night was beautiful, with clear stars in the sky. From somewhere nearby came the sound of children playing, probably Daniel's grandchildren. We built something beautiful, Dorothy said simply. We did, Walter agreed, and there in that simple backyard of a small house in a small town they barely knew years ago, they found something they thought they'd lost forever, peace. It wasn't perfect peace. There were still scars, there were still hard days. The relationship with their children was better, But it would never be what it was before the abandonment. There would always be a shadow, a painful memory. But there was also light, plenty of light, in the community that welcomed them, in the elderly they helped, in the volunteers they inspired, in the grandchildren who grew up learning about compassion and true family. In the legacy of Timmy, kept alive through a cage that became a symbol of something much greater. "You know," Dorothy said suddenly, "I'm grateful." "Grateful for what?" "Everything. The pain, the journey, the lessons. Because without all that, we wouldn't have discovered what we're made of. We wouldn't have found out that even after we're broken, we can rebuild ourselves stronger." "That's true. We survived the worst and found the best in the process. And we did it together. That's what matters most. When everything fell apart, when everyone abandoned us, we had each other, and that was enough." Walter took Dorothy's hand, their two wrinkled hands intertwining with the familiarity of decades together. "You're my favorite person," he said. "And you're mine," she replied. It was that simple. In the end, amid all the complexity, all the pain, all the journey, there were just two people who loved each other and faced the world together. And that, they discovered, was more than enough. End of story. So, what did you think of this story of overcoming? Did it touch you? Do you know someone who went through something similar? Tell us in the comments with your sincere words. And you, would you have made the same choices as Dorothy and Walter? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and most importantly subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.